Gemma, I'm so happy to have you back.
So good to see you again, Kristen.
We're going to talk about stress,
Mm,
your favorite
it's an
topic.
epidemic.
It is an epidemic, which is good for your job.
It is.
'Cause it's way-
Whenever I tell people that I am a stress researcher, they're like, "Oh my God, can I be your guinea pig?" And I say, "Line up." There's a huge line in front of me.
So when people come to, when they're like, all right, we're hiring Gemma, tell us a little bit about what they hire you for.
Oh, it's so many things. Like, I really have this kind of broad remit of topics that I consult about. So it really starts down at the micro or the physiology. So, during my PhD and now within organizations, I look at, physiological aspects of stress, sleep and strain, and, what are you eating that impacts your stress levels? What are you thinking within your head that, increases your stress? And then I really look at sort of team dynamics, organizational behavior, and then, more broadly, where do you fit in the world? And is that really in alignment with your goals and values? And I find that when people are not living in alignment with their goals and values, their meaning and purpose, they actually feel quite stressed.
Yeah. It's
So
that
there is
dissonance,
a,
right?
yeah, there's
Yeah.
like, there's a huge dimension of factors that I look at.
So, Jem, maybe let's start by just defining stress. How it can, give us kind of the clinical definition, and how, I guess, how do you, when you're consulting folks or working with folks, and you kind of set the stage, how do you define stress?
Yeah, stress really means, in layman's terms, different to everybody, but if you look at the academic terminology, there's like chronic stress, which is when, you've got high levels of stress that exceeds where you feel capable of coping with it. And so you sort of have this internal check. Do I have the resources to manage what's in front of me? And, chronic stress is more prolonged in nature. It's more than just the usual day-to-day stress that we experience. And that's when it exceeds your resources. And that's when we see this accumulation of stress, and then it often leads to mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and cardiovascular disease. And we know that's all worsened by chronic stress. Then there's acute stress, which is kind of like in that moment stress.
Which is totally natural and normal. We're all going to have levels of kind of pronounced stress throughout the day, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when does it turn bad? So obviously, it goes from acute to kind of chronic. What is that? What would kind of what would be the criteria, I suppose, where okay, it's no longer just acute, but it's become chronic. What is going unmanaged that basically leads to kind of chronic stress?
Yeah, this is a really good question. It's different for everybody, and there's so many factors that go into your stress resilience or your capacity to deal with stress. And how this manifests is different in a lot of people. So how capable you are of dealing with stress really goes back to even before you're born. So, epigenetics, what sort of environments were your grandparents in, your parents? Then there's your interuterine environment. So, the amount of stress hormones that your mother produced actually has an effect on the growing neural architecture of the fetus. And so, we find that people who had a very stressed out mother, and even in terms of like psychological stress, but also the amount of nutrients that they absorbed when you're in the intrauterine environment, that does change your stress capabilities. And then there is modeling. So, how did your parents and your family and your people around you deal with stress? And then, were they capable of, dealing with lots of stress, or were they quite histrionic? Then there's things like in the moment, like what is your blood glucose level? We know that when you have dips in blood glucose level, that your capacity to deal with stress changes. How much food you've had, where you are in your menstrual cycle, how much sleep you have. I think that's the biggest factor of how much you can deal with stress. And then to answer your question, how long does it take? Well, what I see in my research and when I'm consulting with people, you can be in sort of a high level of stress, I think, for about 8 weeks. And then your typical circuit breaker will manifest. And so the circuit breaker is your stress style. People have different stress styles, and there's a bit of a continuum. So people are either very, what we call expressive, and so they might express their stress emotionally. They might cry, they might get angry, and it's quite visible emotionally. And then there are people who are much more mental stressors. So when they start to get stressed, you find that their mental capabilities start to get suboptimal. So they might get scatty, they might get forgetful, they might get foggy brained, or can't make decisions. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are somaticizers. So these are people who manifest their stress physiologically. And so they might look quite stoic, they don't even realize that they're stressed. And what will happen is their bodies will give away. And we see this, around, 8 weeks of high intensity stress is when your body starts to manifest stress. And that's because stress hormones, cortisol, they that hormone houses, or benches any non-essential metabolic processes within the body that's not designed for immediate survival. So when you're really highly stressed, things like your digestion changes and your immune function changes. So typically your body is engaging in housekeeping duties, like going around scavenging up cancer cells, viruses, bacteria, parasites. But when you're really stressed, your body thinks, I don't have time to do all that housekeeping, scavenging up all those little things. I've got a big thing coming. And so what happens is you'll find that a lot of your immune functions shut down, and then you'll get maybe immunoglobulin G or A that will get a spike in the beginning. And basically what this is preparing your body to be, say, eaten by a saber-toothed
Mm.
tiger. But the internal housekeeping immune function actually gets stopped. And so what we find is people will get really, really sick. Say you're about to go on holidays,
Mm.
and you work really, really hard for a couple of weeks leading up to that holiday, and then your body will clap out once you get on holiday because your immune function can only hang on for so long.
Yeah, I think you hear that all the time. People are like, "I was on holiday, but I got sick," and I think, like, the key is, of course, not to get yourself in that situation, clearly. You know
It's hard though, right? Like, we've got so much pressure to perform,
Yeah, there's a lot.
schedules, deadlines, mortgages, kids.
Parenting, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stress. What would you say? I mean, we're gonna get into the tactics, but I think just when we're, on it, I think, and I know, Jem, you talk a lot about this, these, how do we deactivate in a meaningful way so we can manage that acute stress in a more elegant way, right? So we're not in a situation where we get sick, and I think, and I don't mean to, like, flex the fact that I haven't been sick since 2017, but I'm going to for a second. And
'Cause you're such a good sleeper, Kristen. I
well,
mean, like,
I'm vigilant.
gold standard.
I am vigilant about my sleep and my meal times. But I think there is a taxonomy of behaviors that are immunoprotective, right? And
Absolutely.
can keep us from getting sick, right? If we adopt those behaviors consistently. What would you say from your experience, when you're working with these kind of high stress folks who are in high stakes environments, they've got a lot going on. What are the few behaviors that you would recommend they adopt to protect themselves to enable this housekeeping that you're talking about, right? We don't want to be in a situation where we're not allowing our system to do that protective housekeeping that you described, I think, so beautifully. Like, what are the few behaviors that can kind of get us down a better path?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, is awareness of your stress style.
Mm.
So understand, are you a somaticizer? Are you someone who manifests stress physically? Like, do you sit there finding yourself, you've been clenching your jaw for the last half an hour? Do you feel a tightness in your chest? Do you feel exhausted?
Mm.
And then once you see that first instant sign of stress, or do you start to feel forgetful, or do you start to feel a bit weepy? know that that is a trigger. That is the sign that, stress is starting to accumulate. And once you know that, have your personal protocol.
Mm,
So have your formula. Not all stress is equal, and you have to understand that there are different types of stress that will trigger,
mhm,
be triggered by different types of events. And so understand which types of events are more likely to set you off. So, there's about 5 different types of stress. So there's, physiological stress.
mhm,
So this is when you actually, you don't do enough exercise, or maybe you do too much
mhm,
exercise. There's emotional stress. So maybe you've got people in your life that sort of suck the bone marrow out of you and really drain you emotionally. Or maybe you're stressed because you're lonely and you feel like you haven't got enough, social interaction, connectedness, and intimacy in your life. Then there's, sensory stress. We've all got that because we've all got phones. We all have nighttime lights. We live in noisy
mhm,
environments. We have like this stimulus coming in all the time. Then we've got mental stress. And so this is where we, live in a very cognitively draining environment.
mm,
It seems like every week we have to learn a new device, a new app, a new system.
mm,
Like we're always under cognitive strain. Then we've got, I think, what you call is desire stress. So this is like when you compare yourself to others and that constant need to want a new thing, to
mm,
see everybody else having amazing holidays, big houses, new cars, new technology, amazing handbags. And that comparative stress
mm,
is incredibly draining, and that need to desire. Or there's, on the other hand, there's people who have a lot of stress because they deny themselves things. They said, I've got to
mm,
save, I can't do this, I can't go on holidays, I can't enjoy myself because I need to save, I'm worried about the economy. So that's stressful. And then we've got, the greater, higher consciousness stresses about life, purpose, meaning, direction, where you fit in the universe. Is your daily endeavors actually in alignment with what you want to do?
mm,
So once you work out what type of those stresses is actually driving your stress, then you can do something about it. And so then I'm very much about a targeted approach to stress. So we all know that we've gone on a holiday, we feel absolutely cooked, and we, spend 2 weeks somewhere or a week or whatever, and then we go back to work and you think, I am still exhausted.
mm,
And that's because on that holiday, you didn't actually diminish the types of stress that made you stress in the lead up to that holiday, because you're still scrolling on your phone.
mm.
You've still got your kids asking, can I have this? Can I have that? You still have to pay for that big hotel bill. And so you've still got all the stress, even though you're lying next to a beach,
Yeah,
a beach, or, sitting in the sun, you're still scrolling.
right.
So you actually haven't eliminated, like, that sensory stress or that
Mm,
comparative stress or that emotional stress. You may be engaging in physical rest. So match your rest to your stress.
mm,
So that's sort of broadly. But then, so what are some practical things you can do? And, and we speak about this a lot,
mm,
Kristen, and, this is, really much, very much the foundation of our research is have those pillars of health.
mhm,
So, sleep is absolutely
mm,
imperative. If you're going to put your attention anywhere, making sure you have sleep consistency,
mhm,
good quality sleep is where you get your biggest bang for your buck.
mhm,
And I think that a lot of people, may think they sleep, but unless you're measuring it with like a device like the Whoop, you actually don't know if you're hitting slow wave sleep.
mhm,
You don't know if you're getting REM sleep. And unless, as we know, unless you're hitting slow wave sleep, you're not clearing away all the metabolic byproducts of thinking,
mhm.
that product adenosine.
Yeah.
You may wake up feeling absolutely exhausted, and or unhappy or anxious or depressed. And what humans like to do is we like to post rationalize. We like to wake up and say, you know what, I feel terrible today. It's probably my relationship. It's
Mhm,
probably my job. I hate where I live. Where actually, you probably just didn't get into deep slow wave
mm,
sleep for sufficient amount of time, you didn't clear away the metabolic byproducts of that day or the last accumulative effects of the day, and that stuff makes you feel crazy.
Yeah.
And so when people come to me and say, I feel really stressed, I feel really strung out, the number one thing I ask first up always is, how is your sleep?
Yeah.
And then, if they go, I don't know, I say, get a device, go away, have a week of, good hearty sleep, early to bed
Mhm.
before,
Yeah.
10 o'clock, and then come back. And then I'll work on concentric circles going out from sleep. And so it'll be, what are you eating?
Mhm.
There's a whole lot of foods that actually diminish the quality of your sleep that you don't necessarily know are doing that. So things like heavy protein before bed,
Mhm.
high levels of sugar, alcohol, it's the killer. Even MSG, monosodium
Mm.
glutamate before bed, glutamate is a neurotransmitter. So, for those that don't know what MSG is, it's that product, the flavor enhancer that they put in food to make it taste delicious.
Mhm.
And what I'm seeing
So
with my
sneaky.
data, I know, and I actually think it's a culprit
It's like
in
criminal
poor sleep. Yeah,
in
so
my
when you
view.
look at your data, so just for people who don't know, um, MSG, it makes food taste utterly delicious. People say it's in Asian food, but it's in Mexican, Italian, and French, and any type of takeaway food or
Mm.
restaurant food typically has MSG in it. And you get this like, oh my God, this food tastes delicious. And then when you're going home, you feel like absolutely exhausted. And then you may get into bed and go to sleep and you have crazy dreams all night. And then you wake up like super exhausted and thirsty. Now, if this is happening to you, you've probably had MSG. And what I see in the data is you've got lots of light sleep, hardly any slow wave sleep, and lots of REM sleep. So that's what that crazy dreaming is. So there's another culprit. And Kristen, you speak about this a lot. Light exposure before bed, which kicks your circadian rhythm off in the wrong direction.
Mhm.
So if you've got lux in your eyes over
Mm.
80, this is really going to hit your retinal cells
Yeah.
and kick off that system in the wrong direction. Then other things that really impact your sleep is, cognitive rumination,
Mhm.
emotional rumination. Like, what are you thinking about when you get into bed and lie down? Like, I've got strict rules. When I'm horizontal, the only thing I'm allowed to think about is nice, calm, non-emotionally evoking,
Mm.
relatively boring topics. Otherwise, your brain cannot differentiate between imagining that thing or actually seeing that thing. So
Yeah.
if you're lying in bed thinking about stressful things or an argument you had or what do you have to do tomorrow, your brain will start to produce stress hormones as if that thing is about to happen.
Mm.
Your brain's got this better be safe than sorry policy,
Mm.
and so it'll say, I don't know, you're thinking about stressful things. I may need to fight, run, or activate. So I'm just going to secrete a few, stress hormones just in case. And that's terrible for sleep.
Right.
So, yeah, so sleep, big
So,
thing.
Jem, that will impact not only your ability to fall asleep generally, but even if you're really tired, you might fall asleep. Will that end up fragmenting your sleep, that rumination?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. So,
It
yeah,
rears its head at
as you
some
say,
point, right?
you get exhausted. And if you've got this accumulative
Mm.
amount of, stress hormones, once your body starts to process it'll wake you up. And so what I really advocate is throughout the day is having what I call nano
Mm.
intervals or nano intermissions. So every time you go to do a new task, go to a new tab, change, to a phone call, if you go on to that next page, what I do is I stop and literally have 30 seconds of resonant
Mm.
breathing. And this is this sort of intermission in your day,
Mm.
and then get on to the next thing. And those little punctuated, fracturing the intensity of the stress, I find
Mm.
is incredibly helpful. So by the time you get to bed, you're not just like surging with like stress
Mhm.
hormones and you just like maybe have to take a sleeping tablet or, people drink alcohol to sedate them. But when you've just punctuated the day, it seems like, it's a little bit easier to get to sleep.
Yeah. I
And
think
then there's
people and let's just stay on that just for a second because I think folks feel like it just sounds so simple. But I think that that is the way to like not get sick on your vacation, you know, is to be, to your point, like you map stress, like a stressful situation with like a mini moment or a nano intermission of rest, you know, and you just do
Yeah.
that proactively throughout the day. And it probably doesn't have to be a lot, right, Jem? That's, you know, 30 seconds, a minute where
Yeah.
you're just consciously deactivating. And you mentioned resonance breathing, which I know we both are huge fans of.
Yeah. So I've got a, PowerPoint slide, and I can share this with you. It's literally a waveform,
Mm.
and it's got a little blue ball that's timed for like 6 breaths in, 6 breaths out, and, I have it on my desktop. So
I think I sent that to you,
when
Jem.
I yeah.
My son and I use it at night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you just sort of like and you just pretend you're sucking up the ball and
Yeah,
then
and
breathing out, and honestly, that is like
it's money.
it's so simple and
Yeah.
so quick.
And then, Jem, I wanna talk, I'd love to get your insight. You know, one of the things that we hear a ton from members is just waking up at, you know, 1 AM, 2 AM, and I know that it's the cortisol, right, that's starting to rise. Like, what what is happening during the day or before bed that basically will wake you up or not wake you up? You know, like, I know, like, if I'm ruminating before bed or I have some emotional conversation or maybe I haven't managed stress as effectively, the chances of me waking up at 1 o'clock or 2 AM are higher, I suppose, if I'm managing kind of my emotions and my stress really proactively throughout the day. Is that actually what's happening? Like, is there a, what's kind of happening in the brain during that
Yeah,
moment of
this
wakening?
is Yeah, this is a really important question, and it's something I get asked all the
Mm,
time. And to be honest, we don't know for sure
mm,
why people will, wake at 2 a.m. every morning or 3 a.m., but there are a lot of theories, and I'll just go through some of them. So, typically busy people, knowledge workers who've got a lot on their plate, you do accumulate a lot of really important high stakes
mm,
thoughts and decisions you've got to make. And we don't always have enough time to deeply think about them. So we'll sort of bank it. And so we'll fall asleep exhausted. And then, as you know, the REM component of your sleep architecture is where you consolidate memories, it's where you make sense of your emotional world. And I also think that people don't understand that the REM part of your sleep has a very important forgetting function as well. I call it the defrag part of the sleep
mm,
architecture. So it's basically when your brain says, okay, do I keep, delete? Do I file that away? Do I, is that important? What box inside my head do I compartmentalize that thought? And so when you're in that REM sleep, sometimes these decisions are so important that it'll actually wake you up. So then you can consciously, using your prefrontal cortex, decide about this. Where does this thought get filed?
mm,
And so a really good antidote for that is brain dumping, is where you name to tame. So have a pad beside your bed with a pen, and then you brain dump all of the things that's been
mm,
cogitating on during the day. And I find what's even more helpful is that you have dot points and say, okay, decide whether or not to hire this person or to change jobs. And what you do beside that point, you actually put a time. And so you almost have like a worry hour the next day. So you say, okay, at 10:15, I will think about that topic. Then you put the next topic. Okay, at 10:35, I will think about that
mm,
topic. And so by adding the time to that list, it really does placate that sort of anxious part of your brain that really needs to disentangle these thoughts. And I just think,
that's fascinating.
it's really, really helpful because your brain's really naughty. And if you say to your
Totally.
brain, don't think about this thing, don't think about this
Mm,
thing, what does your brain do? It'll absolutely turbo think of that
yeah.
thing. So what you're doing is just placating that kind of anxious part of your brain that wants to sort this stuff out.
Mm,
And at 3 in the morning, it's quiet. It knows that there's no other distractions except you and your mind. So that's why it'll say, wake up, wake up. But there is other theories, and this is something that I'm utterly fascinated in, and something we're doing research in, is the impact of your gut biome
mm,
on sleep. So we know that inside your digestive tract, you've got, around about 2.5 kilograms of gut biome. I don't know if you can translate that into pounds. What is 2.5 kilograms? It's a lot. You've got like hundreds of millions of different types of microbiome
Mm.
microbes in your digestive
Yeah, it's
tract, and
5.5 pounds.
it's a lot
That's a
just to
lot.
think of that.
That's, like, crazy.
And so we know that they also exhibit diurnal fluctuations.
Mm.
And so these things want
Circadian
to get
rhythm to
yes,
those,
they
yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
they really do. And they are hungry little
Mm.
critters. And so if you're going before bed eating a lot of simple carbohydrates, a lot of sugars, what you're doing is you're feeding, a lot of those certain types of these gut biome, and it's like giving them junk food fairy floss. It's
Mm.
like they're getting food for free because they can digest these sugars very, very quickly, and so they will proliferate, and they have, quite short, quick reproductive
Mhm.
cycles, and so you get this proliferation of gut biome, and there is some theories that they will send out bioidentical hormones as human hunger hormones, and that is what's waking you up. And
Wow.
so, people often will get up and be really starving hungry,
Mm.
and they'll want to go and eat. I call these false hungers. So
Mm.
don't always believe your hunger, because if you've got an overactive or, proliferation of, certain types of gut biome, you will be hungrier,
Mhm.
and then there's a theory that this will actually wake you up.
Mm.
And so I really strongly advise don't have a lot of sugar before bed. More to the point that, sugar is like putting fire in the furnace, and it will increase your metabolic basal rate, like
Mm.
throughout the night.
Mhm.
You'll get a higher resting heart rate
Right.
if you're literally feeding your body with sugar. And so, yeah, so
What's the relationship to cortisol? I kinda go back to that, like, if you're eating sugar and basically you're asking your, body to digest that, that's gonna make you stressed, right? Is it the cortisol that wakes you up, or is it the like, what do you think mechanistically is happening there?
well, you know what cortisol is? It's actually just the hormone that releases the energy that you need to fight or flight.
Right.
So it helps release glycogen from the liver. So it literally is a signal to your body to drop as much, fuel into your bloodstream so you can run.
Right.
And so if you've got high levels of cortisol, your body's thinking, I need to, like, dump all of this sugar into the bloodstream for your big muscle groups, if your heart and your lungs, to fight or flight. So yeah, another thing, I just before we move on about gut biome, there's a great company that we've been doing our research with at the University of Queensland called Microba, and they interestingly have found that those individuals who have got low gut biome biodiversity are more likely to wake up at 3 a.m. than those with a heterogeneous gut biome. So it means that the larger amount of species, different species that you have, the less likely you are to wake up at 3 a.m. So, yeah, really interesting. I don't know, what is the direction of causality? Not sure.
Yeah.
But I think there are many factors at play that will make you have
Yeah.
disrupted
It's
sleep.
clearly
And also,
modifying the relationship between cortisol and that, probably. I mean, that's gotta be mechanistically what's
mhm.
probably happening.
Yeah, and also there is that theory of the bimodal sleep where, for the better part of, 250,000 years, humans might have had two phases of sleep
Yeah.
where they'd go to sleep when the sun went down,
Mhm.
and then they'd wake up in the middle of the night, and the adults would go around and, whittle sticks, converse, have sex,
Mhm.
do stuff, and then they'd have a second sleep
Mhm.
um, cycle. And so it was the industrialized revolution where humans were then pushed into a one sleep cycle.
Mhm.
And then the advent of lights, so we stayed up later, and then that, as you know, I mean, you know more about this than me, the impact of light on your circadian
Mm.
rhythm.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely worth noting that when we're viewing light at a phase of the natural light dark cycle, we put our body under tremendous amounts of stress. And I think that's some of the research that's come out recently, just showing the impact of light viewing between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. has a pro-depressive effect. It actually impacts our dopamine system, is
Yeah, and
and our
remember
mood.
pro-aggressive as
Progress,
well.
yes, I know, which is just
And that's
insane.
like you think about teenagers, they're up all night on their phone, they wake up and they're hungry
Oh,
and grumpy.
yeah, exactly. I
Yeah, so,
know.
like, you're more like, as you know, when you don't, sleep well, the next day you produce more cortisol,
Right.
and also you have cravings for salty, fatty, sugary foods the next day.
Yeah,
So, I mean, it's just like this vicious,
I know.
you know, s self-deprecating cycle, like, you're tired, so you eat more, and you eat more, and then so you don't feel good about yourself, you ruminate more, and because 'cause you're eating bad foods, you actually have worse sleep, and
I
yeah,
know.
I think there's so many people in these terrible cycles, and I think something that I haven't mentioned is the importance of exercise.
Yeah.
So we know that our human physiology is like this amazing pharmacological factory
Mm,
that produces all these anti-anxiety and sleep promoting hormones. Like, there's myokines
mm,
in muscles. We've got osteocalcium when you put weight on your long bones that
mm,
increases, spatial reasoning and memory. And, and if you're not moving your body, your brain actually thinks there's something wrong with
yeah.
you. So there's a sedentary depression hypothesis. So if you think about humans for the better part of our existence, we were rarely, rarely still. Um, we were always moving,
Mhm,
weaving, collecting sticks,
mhm.
like just doing
Yeah.
something. And
Forward
the only
motion
time,
is, like, such a
and yeah,
critical
forward motion,
piece of, like, our evolutionary, yeah,
which
roots.
Huberman talks about.
Mhm.
But if we were sedentary, it typically meant that we were sick,
Yeah.
and so
No longer
our
relevant.
yeah, and our brain, our primitive brain would then make us retreat
Mm,
and sleep. So sleep because the best thing to get better is sleep, and then retreat so we wouldn't infect the clan with whatever we have. And retracting socially and sleepiness are two symptoms of depression. So I honestly think our sedentary nature is often misdiagnosed as depression, anxiety.
yeah.
And also, I honestly believe sleep deprivation is often misdiagnosed as depression and
Yeah.
anxiety.
Yeah.
So,
No
yeah, move
question.
your body. Oh,
Yeah.
there's a really interesting study that's out of Oxford, and they said if you want to get your biggest bang for your buck in terms of improving mood and reducing anxiety and depression, is to move your body forward in an environment that is green,
Mm.
preferably where you can see water,
Mm.
with another person with a shared goal.
Mm. You're checking so
So,
many boxes. Light,
yeah,
connection, movement.
yeah. So
Yeah.
if you wanna stay sane and happy, go for a walk in the green with a friend and have a goal directed. We're going to go to that awesome cafe
Mm.
and sit down and chat. And like honestly, that's super protective.
Yeah.
You're moving, sunlight, laughing, and burning calories, and and strengthening bones.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, perfect.
I love it. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. You've done a lot of your research has been with Aussie Special Forces, so you've worked a lot with both men and women in the Australian military and armed services. Talk a little bit about just that experience, and how does stress kind of manifest in those environments? Maybe talk a little bit about PTSD. But yeah, just would be curious kind of what your experience has been, and how that might be a little bit different than working with knowledge workers, for example.
Yeah, it was a really fascinating environment to go into. So I did a part of my PhD at the Australian Special Forces, and my topic was a preemptive approach to stress
Mm,
using emotional intelligence training as a moderator,
mm,
and then using biomarkers as a proxy for stress. The reason I used biomarkers, so I used cortisol and immunoglobulin A, and that the reason I did that was because that people in that environment typically underreport their levels of
Mm.
stress for many reasons. And so then having an objective way of measuring stress I thought was really important.
How many saliva samples did you take?
Oh my God.
Ew.
Yeah. I think we spoke about this before.
It, like, turns my
Thousands.
stomach just, like, thinking about it.
Even like just remembering it, like, ugh.
Oh.
And like those tubes of snot is really
Oh.
what brought me to you.
Yeah, yeah. You're like,
Because,
"There's gotta be another way to measure this."
you know,
HO9.
yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I honestly was sitting at a lab, and actually one of my lab assistants fainted because it was in Australia, super hot, super gross, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm done with this." This like, surely there's another way, and that's when,
HRV.
um, yeah, and that's when Matt, who was running the Human Performance Wing, the Australian Special Forces, was the first Whoop wearer in Australia, and so he actually
Wow.
heard of the Whoop through an American Special Forces
Mm.
operator,
Give
and
Matt a proper shout out because he's kinda the man behind the scenes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, so former commando was injured in 2010, got blown up by a Russian anti-tank mine, and then actually rehabilitated and went back for a fourth tour to
Jeez,
Afghanistan.
so intense.
And yeah, so he was really incredibly interested in, human
Mm,
performance optimization and, looking at the continuum of health that, there's not like a healthy bucket and a sick bucket. We've got to have this continuum of where you can, still be operational. And then using all of these things we're talking
mm,
about, and the military is super data driven. So, this is when he found the Whoop and was like, this is it. Really suits our purposes. So just going back to your question, these guys were operating in sort of like this really austere environments where one minute they had to be dealing with diplomats and partner forces and nation state people, people who didn't speak English, and then the next minute they're having to hunt Taliban, and so that required an enormous amount of emotional flexibility.
yeah.
So be able to be calm at one minute, but then activate into a combat situation within seconds, and then down regulate and come back. And so a lot of my work was really looking at how we could train this emotional flexibility, emotional management,
Mm,
emotional perception, understanding that emotions is data, and that you can use that to make effective decisions depending on what context, and you know how to upregulate those around you, how to moderate the emotion and the stress of your team and those partner forces. And so it was really, yeah, it was actually like a lot of fun and really, really fascinating, because they said to me, okay, you're teaching stress. You really need to know what kind of stress that we experience. So, I got chucked out of a plane, chucked off a tower, got to, use their weaponry, a whole lot of things, did a full mission profile. Yeah, so just, really got to, so it was like an ethnographic immersion into this environment.
so cool.
And so what we were really looking at is, as I said before, a preemptive approach to stress, is getting all of these tools into their toolbox or into their vernacular.
Mm,
So when the high stakes, high stress moments came, they were already fairly equipped to pull these out of the toolbox. And so this took engaging in stress inoculation activities. So you never really want to work out what is your stress style, how you respond to stress in that moment. You want to have a pretty good idea of, how you respond prior
mm,
to those moments. So there was a lot of stress inoculation activities, and a lot of contextualizing the science in their particular world. So Matt, the commando, he would stand there and tell stories and say, "This is what happened to us. This is what happened when these guys got blown up. This is what happened when we got stressed. This is, like, had all these amazing
mm,
stories." And then we would oscillate between me and the theory. And so I would come in and give physiological theory to all the stories that he told. And I would tell the basic principles of the human stress response system, cortisol,
mhm.
testosterone, oxytocin. and kind of tell stories through hormones
Mm.
and physiological processes. So it was a really effective model.
And
And
was
so,
that process to try to get them to understand their emotions and understand the root of those emotions, what's actually happening physiologically, so they could
yeah,
manage
yeah,
them more effectively, or
yeah. So understanding the bidirectional nature of emotions and physiological responses.
mm,
So, you'll get your body will send messages up to your brain, and then your brain will then, praise that in a way that you will make an emotion manifest, or then you'll have emotions that will then like actually transmute into physiological
mhm,
reactions. So there's a very much a bidirectional relationship. So getting them to really understand all of those things, emotional perception, being able to look at someone's faces and infer what are they thinking, what are their next actions, emotional perception in yourself, as I spoke about, what's your first instant sign of stress, um, and so lots of context driven education for their environment. And so some of the things that we taught in terms of how to be some of the protective factors to stop you from getting PTSD was, there was a formula. In order to be protective, you needed to be intellectually stimulated, socially connected, and physically active. And so and you needed to have a multi-dimensional identity. So don't just be utterly consumed with the concept that I am a commando,
mm.
I am a special forces soldier. Actually, you know what? You're a multi-dimensional, complicated human that has multifactorial skills and interests and connections into community.
Mm.
The reason we did this is because if you do get injured, and the one thing you are is a commando, and now you're an injured
Mhm.
commando, that's a very dangerous
Yeah.
proposition. You put yourself in a terribly precarious situation if you are just a unidimensional human.
Mhm.
And so
It happens to
a lot of
athletes
it,
too, I
oh,
mean, you
yeah.
see this, we work with Australia Institute of Sport,
Mhm.
really high level athletes, like,
Yeah,
you must see this all the time. I know personally just transitioning out of, international competition, like, you it's a it's a
mhm.
challenge, because your identity is
Absolutely. And
wrapped up in that.
even knowledge
Mhm.
workers, like, if you're a CEO or if
Mm.
you're a lawyer or and then you lose your job,
Yeah. Or you
I mean,
retire.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, when you're retiring too, that's a big one. And so it's just about having multiple touch points um, in your life that if one thing's falling down,
Mm.
at least you've got your community, at least you're of
Mm.
service, at least you've got a hobby, at least you've got a sport that you love, at least your partner still wants to talk to you. So there was a lot of that, and then as we talk about the biopsychosocial model,
Mhm.
so looking at all those factors in your life that create allostatic load. And so allostatic load is all those little pebbles that sort of like weigh down the bridge. And it's okay, one pebble, two pebble, three pebble, 16 pebbles, 100 pebbles, maybe okay. But then when the big truck comes over that bridge, that's when
Mm.
um, that's when the bridge falls. And you
Mm.
think, oh, it was the bridge that did it. Well, actually, no, it was like the 16 million pebbles that you piled up into your life. What are those pebbles? So how you sleep, how
Mm.
you move,
Mhm.
what you let run around in your head,
Mhm.
how you ruminate,
Mhm.
because we know thoughts become chemicals,
Mm.
and those chemicals do damage to your body. Thoughts aren't just ephemeral, concepts that are out in the ether. Thoughts become tangible chemicals that impact your immunity, impact your digestion, impact your, cardiovascular health. So that's, another thing. How you interact with your significant other, your kids, how you interact at work, how you interact in your team, and then how you interact in your broader community organization, and then how you show up in the world. So they're all the factors that we looked at in terms of reducing allostatic load. And so this is what we talk about: energy management, knowing what factors deplete you and knowing what factors replenish you. And that really goes back to those 5 types of stress as well. Um, Knowing which things are really like sucking the bone marrow out of you. And you see yourself as a vessel full of energy. There's got punch holes in the side of vessel where it just leaks out. You might be pouring in more energy in the top of that vessel, but if you've got holes punched in the bottom, you don't even know you've got these
Mm.
holes. It's a, you know, it's a sum zero game.
So building this toolkit, did you have any data on, individuals that then experienced a traumatic event that could potentially lead to some sort of post-traumatic kind of stress disorder or event? Like, did you know did you were you able to quantify kind of any buffering effect for individuals who really had a great grasp of these tools and then kind of incorporated them into their life? Did that buffer them from these kind of stressful events, or were you able to?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
we find that the special forces guys actually have lower levels of PTSD than say normal army guys or community.
Interesting.
I think because they've got really high IQs, they have this bent for mastery, and that they really understand the need to watch, you know, their physiology,
Mm,
watch their psychology. And so when we went through and did my research, I did 2 years of research and then spent several years then consulting back. We found that the guys that we trained in the emotional intelligence training, it was like a 5-day package, that those guys actually had, better cortisol profiles, better immune function profiles, but they also had better memory recall.
mm,
They actually had more accurate shooting. Yeah, and we had more guys get through the really, really hard commando selection course. It was an 18-month
mm,
course. So attention to emotional intelligence factors was absolutely protective, and it actually helped them in their vocation.
mm. Gemma, we ask all of our high performers this question. What are you obsessing over right now?
Oh my God, like where do I start? I've got so many. Let me think. I am obsessing over. Oh, I love. I'm really super interested in the impact of gut
Mm,
biome and blood glucose levels on like leadership
mm.
performance and decision making. So that's I'm doing a lot around, the psychophysiological impact on our behaviors, and I'm looking at what else have I been looking at. I'm really interested in chemo signaling. So, the impact of our emotional expression and how this actually sends off chemicals, efferent chemicals that humans can subconsciously pick up. So,
Mm.
we know when you walk into a room and you're like, oh, you can cut the air with a knife, you're like, well, something's been going on in here. Well, when we know now that, if you're tired, you actually produce a lot more cortisol the next day,
Mm.
or if you're stressed, you produce cortisol, and people can pick it up. And there's research to, show that we've got receptors on our skin and in our paranasal sinuses that are really, really potent detectors of other people's stress. So, like that whole concept of emotional contagion and being aware of that within teams, like sporting
I
teams,
mean, our
and
psychological
within
safety
workplaces.
finding right there,
Oh,
you
yes,
know?
yes. So, as we know, we did a great study with Amy Edmondson and Whoop and McKinsey, and we looked at,
Nadia
and
Fox.
yeah,
Mhm,
gorgeous PhD Nadia Fox. Shout out to Nadia.
mhm,
And we found that those leaders who were sleep deprived and stress, their team members had lower levels of psychological
mhm.
safety when that leader was like the night before hadn't slept enough
Yeah,
or was stressed, which is amazing
yeah,
because the subordinates that answered our question, they had no idea what the boss was doing the night before, but they could just feel that something was a bit off,
yeah,
and so they were a bit more protective,
yeah.
retractive,
It's the
and
chemo
they didn't.
signaling. I
Yeah,
mean, it's
yeah,
just wild. Like how you could
absolutely,
see it in your
yeah,
face, just 45 minutes of sleep dep
yeah.
yeah,
And you're putting off so much more cortisol,
yeah.
and also there's all these micro expressions,
Mm.
and you're probably a little bit
You
shorter,
can't
a
even
little bit.
perceive, yeah, that they're
Mm.
happening.
But I'm also really interested in psychoneuroimmunology.
Mm.
So that is. Have you heard about the blister box study?
No.
That's when I think it's Janice Keecolt-Glasser. She did this study where they got couples into the lab, and then she had this little device, which was a box that you'd attached to your skin, and it rubbed a blister into the skin of these people.
Dang.
And then what she did is she drew a needle into the blister and drew out the blister solution and looked at immune markers. I think there was like interleukin 6 or something. And then she got these couples to either get along in the lab and talk about nice things, or she got the couples to argue. And what she found, that those couples that argued, their blisters took, I think it was like 6 days extra to heal
What?
than those couples who didn't
Wow.
argue. And I'm probably butchering the stats here, but the basic premise of this study is that the quality of your relationships is highly correlated with the quality of your ability to
Yeah.
repair and recover.
Wow.
And so you think about in sporting teams, like all, if you've got any type of, friction within
Mhm.
a sporting team, this is a really huge physiological performance hinderer.
Wow.
And this is, something that we spoke about a lot with the Australian Olympic swim team going into Tokyo. We talked about, the importance of, trust, psychological safety, and good feeling, because if you have any type of friction with your team members, that produces, chemicals that are performance inhibiting chemicals, ruin your sleep, you know, house your immune function, and make recovery a lot slower.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, so super fascinating.
Gemma, we're super, super pumped about our Wim Hof study. Why don't you give us a 1-2 about what we're trying to achieve with that and what that's gonna I know we're ramping up here soon.
Yeah, this is super exciting. So, just to give you a bit of background, so I work with a company called Wilson Asset Management, and Jeff Wilson, the founder, the chairman, he's this amazing, incredibly philanthropic man. And so he is friends with Wim Hof, and Wim said, I want to do some research, around my method. And Jeff, who I work with, said, I know the person to help you with that. So we met Wim, and he said, yeah, I would, he's so charismatic and excitable. And he said, I want to test, my method. And so we can't really exactly give the complete details of what we're testing, but basically we're looking at, does the Wim Hof method have statistically significant improvements in knowledge worker physiology and psychology? And we're using the WHIP device on all of our participants. So we're going to have some really hard objective data to really deep dive into the Wim Hof method. So watch this space. It's kicking off very soon, and hopefully we'll have some incredible data to report on our research. So yeah, thank you to Whoop for providing the Whoop devices for this study. This is a really big contribution, and it's really going to make it really scientifically valid.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jem. Yeah, we're really excited. It's an area that is relatively untapped from a research perspective, and I think putting together the breath work and the cold, it's such a beautifully designed study too. Like I love the design. I think it's gonna enable us to show effects.
There's so much rigor behind
Yeah,
this
there really
study.
is. It's really beautiful. So I'm excited for this. Okay, final question, Jem. What are the 3 simple ways to mentally prepare or calm yourself during a stressful situation?
Oh, this is a good question, because everybody is going to face in a
Mhm.
stressful situation. So I haven't got 3 things, but I'm really cognizant of what we call anticipatory stress. So what are your thoughts in the lead up, the
Mm,
night before or the couple of days before? Be very disciplined about what you think about, because when you're talking about, like, winning a race or performing in a speech, hundredths of a second or every single word matters. And so Stressing in the lead up to an event is very metabolically expensive. It actually draws your vital energy. So, night before, be very disciplined about what you're thinking about. Don't eat heavy meat the night before. Don't have MSG. Don't have alcohol. Hydrate. And then in the morning, when you get up, if you haven't slept very well, don't worry about it. Okay. Humans are okay with one night of sleep deprivation. What is dangerous is sleep deprivation plus sleep deprivation anxiety.
Mm.
You've got to decouple the anxiety about not sleeping and not sleeping, because one night's totally fine. So just look for evidence that, oh, you know what, I actually feel not too bad. In the morning, I would have protein for breakfast. I wouldn't have any sugars for breakfast because you get this blood sugar
Mm. Mhm.
fluctuation. So I'd have, some good protein. I would photon gaze. I would get light into my retinas that would activate my, you know, circadian rhythm in the right
Mhm.
direction. I would oxygenate my brain in the morning. So I'd make sure that I would do some kind of like exercise.
Mhm.
And then before that stressful event, I would have a battery of success recalls. So I would be thinking about all the times when I actually did really well.
Mm.
I would not be at all thinking about what if I mess up? What if I fumble? What if I do the right thing? So um, my mental capacity would be all around positive success, you know, good affirmations. Then I would visualize or remember off by heart the first 3 slides or the first 3 minutes of that talk or the first 3 seconds of that race. And then right before that stressful event, I would spend time resonant breathing, like through the nose,
Mhm.
um, and then out through the
Following
nose.
that
And
little
we
blue
know
ball.
that, yeah, we know that inside the paranasal
Mm.
sinuses, you've got enzymes that produce nitric oxide, which, that's a vasodilator,
Mm.
and it sort of drops your blood pressure, and it just has an extra calmative
Mm.
effect. Then, if I got really, really stressed and started to panic, I would do a vagus nerve reset.
Mm.
And that would just reset the frenetic messaging up to my brain, and it would help me reset and regain. And then I'd just keep resonant breathing. And then if I messed up, I'd be like, whatever.
Amazing. Well, Gemma, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation and so many interesting insights. I appreciate your time and your expertise.
Always great chatting, Kristen. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course.